The wind roared like a vengeful spirit as Kuriki stood atop Denali, the highest peak in North America. The year was 2004, and the elements seemed to howl in defiance, testing the limits of his resilience. He had done it, conquered one of the most unforgiving summits on Earth, but he could never have imagined that this moment of triumph would ignite a journey that would spiral from glory to controversy, from adulation to whispers of doubt, and ultimately to the merciless clutches of the world's deadliest mountain. By 2005, Kuriki's name was beginning to carve itself into the annals of mountaineering. One by one, the great peaks fell beneath his feet: Aconcagua, Elbrus, and Kilimanjaro. His relentless ambition was impossible to ignore. The mountaineering world took notice of this unassuming yet tenacious figure. The peaks he conquered. When he reached the summit of Oceania's Karstens Pyramid, it was clear Kuriki was destined for greatness. The momentum only grew. By 2007, his conquest of Cho Oyu and Vinson Massif secured his place among the elite. A television documentary immortalized his triumphs, launching him into the limelight. Fame followed. So did sponsors, eager to be associated with the rising star. With every ascent, his legend expanded, his status elevating beyond the cold, desolate peaks he had made his home. He became more than a climber. He became a symbol of ambition, of pushing beyond human limits. But the higher he climbed, the darker the shadows beneath him became. Doubts began to whisper through the mountaineering community. Kuriki's claims of solo alpine-style ascents without supplemental oxygen were met with scrutiny. Whispers turned into accusations. Could he really have done it alone? The revelations of his reliance on guides and fixed ropes cast a shadow over his declarations of independence. The contradictions in his accounts, particularly on Kilimanjaro, where a guide is mandatory, only fueled the skepticism. Was he the fearless soloist he claimed to be, or was there another truth lurking beneath the surface? Then came the failures, the brutal, humiliating setbacks that no amount of sponsorships or television specials could erase. Unsuccessful attempts on Everest, Annapurna, and Shishapangma tarnished his once flawless record. His decisions were questioned, his rushed schedules, his dangerous acclimatization strategies. Everything was scrutinized under the harsh, unforgiving light of public opinion. His 2009 Everest attempt ended in exhaustion and altitude sickness, forcing him to turn back in disgrace. Then, in 2012, Everest took its first real piece of him. A devastating failure on Shishapangma left him frostbitten, his body ravaged by the mountain's icy grip. 9 fingers, lost forever to the cold. The world watched, expecting this to be the end. But Kuriki was not one to yield. In 2014, he clawed his way back to success with a triumphant ascent of Broad Peak. It was meant to be his redemption. It wasn't. The years that followed were a relentless storm of missteps. Failures in 2015, 2016, and 2017 turned him into a figure of mockery. The internet was merciless. His name, once celebrated, became a subject of ridicule. The great climber, the man who had dared to challenge the sky, was now the punchline to a cruel joke. But Kuriki was not finished. Determined to reclaim his glory, he set his sights on Everest once more. This time, he would do the impossible, an ascent via the perilous southwest face, one of the most treacherous routes. No supplemental oxygen, no safety net. This would be his masterpiece, his final declaration to the world that he belonged among the legends. But legends are not made without sacrifice. On May 21, 2018, Kuriki began his ascent. The world, once captivated by his triumphs, now watched with a mixture of doubt and morbid curiosity. The jubilant explorer who had once commanded admiration was now a solitary figure against Everest's vast, indifferent expanse. His support had waned. His sponsors had abandoned him. His reputation had crumbled beneath him like an unstable ice shelf. Still, he climbed. Then fate struck, illness. It seeped into his body like a slow poison, sapping his strength, clouding his mind. He pressed on, but the mountain does not forgive weakness. At 7,400 meters, the sickness worsened. His breathing became ragged. A persistent cough racked his body, each gasp of thin air an agonizing battle. Pain burned through his chest. He knew something was wrong. Desperation clawed at him. He sent a radio message to his climbing guides at Camp 2, his voice barely more than a whisper. Help. He needed help. The guides responded immediately, fighting their way through the brutal night, the freezing darkness swallowing every step. But Everest is vast. Everest is merciless. Then, silence. The radio cut off. The guides, struggling against the mountain's relentless assault, could not find him in the dark. Time slipped away, vanishing into the howling winds. Somewhere in that frozen abyss, Kuriki, alone and battered, continued his desperate fight against the inevitable. And then, Everest took him. In the dead of night, weakened beyond the point of return, Kuriki lost his footing. He fell down the treacherous slope, his body battered by the very mountain he had spent his life trying to conquer. The cold seeped into his bones, the icy fingers of hypothermia tightening their grip. In those final moments, did he regret? Did he realize that Everest had never been his to conquer, that it had merely allowed him to climb, to dream, before finally demanding its price? The next day, they found him. His body lay at 7,200 meters near Camp 2. His journey, his desperate, relentless quest for redemption, had ended in the unforgiving embrace of Everest. The news rippled through Japan, through the climbing world. Shock, mourning, reflection. Some called him a hero, others whispered of arrogance, of ambition unchecked. But in the end, Kuriki's story is not merely one of triumph or failure. It is a tale of human will, of ambition that defied reason, of the unbreakable bond between man and mountain. It is a reminder that no matter how skilled, how prepared, how determined, we are all at the mercy of forces far greater than ourselves, and Everest always has the final say. It was January 20th, 2021, a bitterly cold day in the Scottish borders. The wind cut across the open land, making the already demanding job of working outdoors even more grueling. But for Robert MacArthur, it was just another day on the job. At 32 years old, Robert was a seasoned, charged-hand linesman with 13 years of experience in the industry. He was respected by his colleagues, known for his reliability, dedication, and no-nonsense approach to work. Outside of his job, he was a passionate football fan, a die-hard Rangers supporter, and a man who took pride in providing for himself and his loved ones. He had operated heavy machinery countless times before, and on this day, he was tasked with moving a mobile elevated work platform, MEWP, near Long Formicus Barrier, working on a new electricity line. The MEWP was a powerful but potentially dangerous machine. It was designed to help workers reach difficult areas, particularly on rough terrain. It required precision, patience, and strict adherence to safety protocols. The terrain in this area was challenging, uneven, steep, and unpredictable. That's why there was an approved access route, one carefully selected to minimize risks. Robert and his colleagues were supposed to follow that designated path. It was the safest way down. But for reasons no one will ever fully understand, Robert made a fateful decision. He chose a shortcut. Maybe he thought it would save time. Maybe he was confident in his abilities. Maybe he had taken the shortcut before and thought he could handle it again. Whatever his reasoning, the choice would prove to be deadly. At first, the descent seemed manageable. The MEWP moved slowly down the steep 22 to 23 degree gradient, its heavy caterpillar tracks gripping the cold earth beneath it. But as Robert maneuvered the machine further down, the ground beneath the tracks became unstable. Then it happened. The MEWP suddenly lost traction. It slid over a raised sheep track, throwing its weight off balance. Robert must have felt the shift instantly, the stomach-churning realization that the machine was no longer under his control. The MEWP started to turn sideways, the metal tracks acting like skis on ice. It was now careening down the slope at a terrifying speed. Robert struggled to regain control, but there was nothing he could do. The MUP struck a raised, compact tuft of grass, and in an instant, the massive machine tipped over. The weight of the vehicle was too great, and gravity took over. Robert wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The moment the machine toppled, he was violently thrown from the operator's cabin. He hit the frozen ground hard, likely dazed, possibly unconscious. But before he could react, the MUP came crashing down on top of him. The force of the impact was catastrophic. Emergency services rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. The injuries were too severe. Robert MacArthur, a man who had spent years mastering his craft, was gone. In the aftermath, a fatal accident inquiry was conducted at Jedburgh Sheriff Court. Sheriff Peter Patterson led the investigation, piecing together the final moments of Robert's life. The findings were as devastating as they were clear. Robert could have survived. The evidence showed that had he been wearing his seatbelt, he would have likely remained inside the MEWP during the accident. He might have suffered injuries, but he would have had a real chance at survival. Instead, he had been thrown into the machine's deadly path. The second, equally tragic conclusion was that the accident was entirely avoidable. If Robert had followed the designated access route, the one designed to prevent precisely this kind of disaster, he never would have lost control in the first place. The company, Keltbray Rail Limited, had done its part. Their systems were in place. Their safety procedures were clear. But in a moment of haste, Robert had taken a different path. Sheriff Patterson noted that Robert's personality might have played a role. He was a diligent worker, someone who wanted to get the job done efficiently. But sometimes, experience can lead to overconfidence. The "let's just get on with it" attitude that had made him a respected worker may have also led him to take an unnecessary risk. It's a haunting reminder of how even the smallest decisions can have life-altering consequences. One unfastened seatbelt, one shortcut, one moment of misplaced confidence. That was all it took. Robert's story is not just a tragedy, it's a lesson. Safety protocols exist for a reason. They are not suggestions. They are not inconveniences. They are the line between life and death. No matter how experienced someone is, no matter how many times they've done a job before, complacency can be fatal. For Robert MacArthur, a man who had built a career on precision and skill, it was a cruel irony. And for those who knew him, who worked alongside him, and who loved him, it was a loss that will never be forgotten. The African sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting long shadows across the open plains of the Lion Park near Johannesburg. It was meant to be a day of wonder, of breathtaking encounters with the wild, one that Catherine Chappell, a 29-year-old American, had dreamed of. She had always sought adventure, and this was no exception. A gifted visual effects editor, she had helped bring fantastical worlds to life on screen, working on Game of Thrones, Divergent, and Captain America, the Winter Soldier. But no special effects could have prepared her for the raw, unpredictable force of nature that would meet her that day. She had come to South Africa with purpose, not just to see, but to contribute. A passionate conservationist, she had plans to make a film about the war against poaching, to tell the stories that so often went unheard. She had arrived a week early, eager to explore before her volunteer work began. But on that June afternoon in 2015, something went terribly, irreversibly wrong. The safari vehicle moved slowly through the park, the air filled with the deep, rhythmic sounds of the wild. Then, from the tall grass, a lioness emerged. Muscles rippling beneath its golden coat, it moved with silent grace, its amber eyes locked onto the vehicle. Chappell, drawn to the moment, lifted her camera. The urge to capture the beauty before her was irresistible, but the rule was clear. Windows must remain closed. She rolled hers down. The lioness approached, each step deliberate. A few feet away, it paused, staring. Then, in an instant, the calm shattered. A blur of motion, a flash of teeth. The lioness lunged. The attack was swift and brutal. Before anyone could react, powerful jaws clamped down. Chappell had no time to scream, no time to pull away. The force was unimaginable. Blood sprayed across the seat. Chaos erupted as the guide, Pierre Potgieter, fought desperately to drive the lion away, his own hands torn in the struggle. His heart pounded, then faltered. Pain lanced through his chest as he collapsed, the weight of the moment proving too much. Within minutes, it was over. Chappelle, the bright, adventurous soul who had touched so many lives, lay motionless, her journey tragically ended. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. The news sent shockwaves through those who knew her. Her family, her mother Mary, her father John, her siblings Jennifer, Lauren, and Ryan were left reeling. Katie was brilliant, kind, adventurous, they wrote, their grief spilling onto the pages of social media. Her energy and passion could not be contained by mere continents or oceans. She had lived so fully, embracing the world with open arms, only to be taken in an instant. Back home, the industry she had worked so hard to be a part of mourned. She had been part of an Emmy-winning team, her work leaving an indelible mark on the world of film. And yet, it was the real world she had longed to capture, its beauty, its danger, its truth. Authorities opened an investigation, but the facts were clear. The lion had done what lions do. It had not attacked out of malice or cruelty. It had simply followed its instincts. The wild is not a place of safety. It is not a place that forgives mistakes. Catherine Chappelle had traveled across the world in search of something greater than herself. She had dreamed of adventure, of telling stories that mattered. In the end, she became one. Standing at 29,032 feet above sea level, Jason Kennison felt the sting of thin air at the summit of Mount Everest. His breath came in short, white puffs, disappearing into the endless expanse of the sky. Below him, the world stretched in all directions, jagged, snow-covered peaks of the Himalayas, shimmering under the thin veil of sunlight. The moment should have been euphoric. It should have been everything he dreamed of. For Jason, this climb wasn't just about reaching the highest point on Earth. It was about defying fate itself. In 2006, a devastating car accident left him paralyzed. Doctors told him he would never walk again. That was supposed to be the end of his journey, but Jason refused to accept that fate. Against all odds, he stood, he walked, and now he conquered. His ascent was more than a mountaineering achievement. It was a statement, a final act of defiance against the impossible. He had dedicated this climb to a higher purpose, raising funds for Spinal Cord Injuries Australia, determined to inspire others to fight for their own second chances. But Everest has never been kind to those who celebrate too soon. The thin air at the summit was turning against him. A dull headache crept in, slow at first, then vicious. His breaths became shallow. Something was wrong. A wave of nausea hit him like a sledgehammer, and his vision blurred. The once stunning view twisted into a dizzying nightmare. His movements grew sluggish, uncoordinated. His body was failing him. The Sherpa guiding him, Dawa Stephen, saw it instantly. Jason was in trouble. The team rushed to help, but the mountain does not wait for second chances. They needed to get him down, fast. With painstaking effort, they guided Jason to a place known as the balcony, a precarious resting point at 27,600 feet. But time was running out. The oxygen tanks were nearly empty. Jason's condition was worsening. The Sherpa faced an agonizing decision: stay and risk everyone's lives, or descend and come back with reinforcements. They made the only choice they could. The group left, promising to return. But Everest is a cruel and merciless beast. As they descended to Camp 4 to resupply, the winds howled with deadly force, trapping them below. The weather shifted violently, cutting off their path back to Jason. He was alone, stranded in the death zone. With no oxygen, no help, and no way out, Jason Kennison took his final breath on the unforgiving slopes of Everest. His body, now frozen in time, became part of the mountain itself, another soul claimed by the world's highest graveyard. His family mourned, but they did not regret. Jason had chased his dream to the very edge of existence, and he had won. He had conquered Everest, but Everest had claimed him in return. On June 2, 2022, what should have been just another workday turned into a nightmare beyond imagination. Stephen Dirk, a 39-year-old father of 3, had barely begun his new job at the Caterpillar Foundry in Mapleton, Illinois. It was only his 9th day, a day filled with hope for the future, a fresh start to provide for his family. But by the time the shift was over, Stephen was gone. Not just gone, erased. Stephen wasn't just another worker. He was a family man, deeply devoted to his partner, Jessica Sutter, and their 3 young daughters, aged 4, 5, and 12. Living in Peoria, Illinois, he had taken this job to secure a better future for them. But little did he know, the very place he sought opportunity would become the site of his unthinkable final moments. The Caterpillar Foundry was a behemoth of industry, melting up to 1,000 tons of iron daily, producing parts for heavy machinery. But behind its massive output was a lurking danger. A smelting facility running at 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit is no place for mistakes. One wrong move could mean instant death, and that's exactly what happened. It was just past 9:20 a.m. when Stephen was assigned a seemingly simple task: collect a sample of molten iron from the massive crucible, a vat containing liquid metal hot enough to melt a human body in seconds. There were no guardrails, no safety harness, no second chances. Then it happened. A misstep, a slip, a fraction of a second. Stephen fell, but he didn't fall completely. He landed partially inside the hellish cauldron. His lower body was instantly incinerated, while the rest of him remained, if only for a moment. In the blink of an eye, Stephen's existence was reduced to ash. Panic erupted through the facility. The Peoria County Coroner's Office and Sheriff's Department were called, but there was little left to recover. By 10:20 a.m., the entire foundry was evacuated. The iron inside the crucible cooled, and when the coroner's team returned hours later, they found only small bone fragments. The cause of death? Thermal annihilation. What's even more horrifying is that this tragedy was preventable. Following an investigation by OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, it was determined that Caterpillar had failed to implement basic safety measures that could have saved Stephen's life. The fine? A mere $145,000. A slap on the wrist for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. To make matters worse, this wasn't the first death. Just 6 months earlier, another worker, Scott Adams, had also lost his life at the same facility. Employees had long voiced their concerns about the grueling conditions and unsafe practices, but their warnings went unheard. For Jessica Sutter, the pain was unbearable. She had lost the love of her life, and their daughters had lost their father, all because of negligence. She held Caterpillar directly responsible for his death, stating that the company showed no remorse, no accountability, and not a single offer of support to the family left behind. In the end, no criminal charges were filed, no justice was served, and for those who still walk the floors of the Caterpillar Foundry, the question lingers: how many more lives will be lost before something changes? In the summer of 2024, what was meant to be a once-in-a-lifetime adventure for Lisa Manders and her husband Craig turned into an unthinkable nightmare. The New Jersey couple had embarked on a dream safari in Zambia, eager to witness Africa's breathtaking wildlife up close. But within days of their arrival, that dream became a horrifying ordeal, one that would haunt Craig forever. On June 5th, Lisa Manders, a mother of 3 and a respected professional in the financial industry, set out on a bushwalk with her husband and a group of tourists. Led by experienced guides, they ventured to a riverbank where a lone hippopotamus lurked in the water. Massive and deceptively fast, hippos are among the most dangerous animals in the wild, fiercely territorial and capable of charging without warning. Yet, the group was encouraged to observe from close range, assured that they were safe. Then, without warning, everything unraveled in seconds. The hippo lifted its head, a moment of stillness. Then it exploded from the water with terrifying speed. Lisa turned to run, but it was too late. The monstrous creature lunged, its enormous jaws clamping around her body, lifting her off the ground like a rag doll. Screams filled the air. The guides, who were supposed to protect the group, fled. The massive beast shook Lisa violently, its crushing bite shattering bones, ending her life in an instant. Craig could only watch in helpless horror as his wife was mauled to death before his eyes. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Craig Manders was left shattered, grappling not only with the violent loss of his wife, but also with the chilling realization that it could have been prevented. He has since filed a lawsuit against African Portfolio, the Connecticut-based tour company that arranged their safari, accusing them of negligence. He claims they were never adequately warned about the dangers of being so close to a wild hippo on foot, nor did the guides take proper precautions to protect them. Had we understood the dangers posed by the hippopotamus, we never would have agreed to be in such close contact while on foot, Manders said in a statement through his attorneys. The idea that we were unwittingly exposed to such an extreme danger, a danger made even worse by our tour guides leaving Lisa alone on foot with nothing between her and such a deadly animal, is nothing short of astonishing. African Portfolio has denied responsibility, with their attorney Rod Gould arguing that the company merely organizes tours and is not liable for incidents that occurred during the trips. My client is a tour operator. It organizes tours, Gould said. A trip, for example, might include airfare. We're not responsible if the airline loses luggage. But for Craig Manders and his family, this was not just an unfortunate accident. It was an unforgivable failure. Lisa Manders was more than just a tourist in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a woman whose life was stolen in a gruesome attack that should never have happened. Lisa was the best mother and wife anyone could ever hope for, her husband said, his voice heavy with grief. Her violent death is a devastating loss not only for our family but for our community. The details of her final moments are almost too horrific to imagine, yet they serve as a haunting reminder of the raw, unpredictable danger of the wild. For those who dream of safaris, drawn by the promise of adventure, Lisa's story is a chilling, cautionary tale, a reminder that in the heart of the wilderness, the line between wonder and horror can vanish in an instant. The icy wind cut through Christopher John Coolish as he stood on the slopes of Mount Everest, his 62-year-old frame bracing against the rising sun. It was May 27, 2019, and before him stretched a sight few ever witnessed, the roof of the world, bathed in golden light. This was the moment he had dreamed of. For Christopher, an American lawyer and passionate mountaineer, Everest wasn't just a mountain. It was the final piece of a lifelong journey. He wasn't here just to stand on top of the world. He was chasing the 7 summits, the elite club of climbers who had conquered the highest peak on every continent. But Everest does not give victories. It takes them. Christopher had trained for years, honing his body and mind against some of the harshest landscapes on Earth. He was no amateur. He knew the dangers of altitude, the thin air, the bone-shattering cold. His team climbed steadily, making their way through serpentine ice fields and towering ridges, the mountain momentarily kind to them. The weather held. The winds were still. It was as if Everest welcomed them forward. But Everest is never truly kind. They stopped at Camp 4, perched at a terrifying 26,000 feet, the gateway to the death zone, where oxygen is scarce and the human body begins to die with every passing second. This was the final staging ground before the ultimate push. Oxygen tanks were checked, layers adjusted, a final deep breath. Then, the final ascent began. The climb was grueling. Every step burned. The air was razor-thin, each breath a battle. Christopher pushed through the agony, his heart hammering against his ribs, muscles screaming for relief. Then, he was there. At the summit of Everest, Christopher stood victorious. The world stretched endlessly below him. The sunrise painted the sky in hues of fire and gold. He had done it, conquered the highest peak on Earth. But Everest does not let go so easily. As they began their descent, something was wrong. Christopher felt an odd tightness in his chest. His breathing grew labored, as if he were inhaling through a straw. His hands trembled, his vision blurred. His teammates noticed immediately. Concern flashed in their eyes. They urged him forward, knowing that getting down is always more dangerous than going up. Then, without warning, Christopher collapsed. Panic surged through the group. They tried to rouse him, to force oxygen into his lungs, but the truth was undeniable. This was not altitude sickness. This was something far deadlier. Christopher had suffered a cardiac arrest. His heart had failed him, not in the safety of his home, not in a hospital bed, but on the slopes of the deadliest mountain on Earth. Everest had claimed him. There was no chance to save him. No helicopters could reach them in time. No miracle rescues at this altitude. He was gone. But in the wake of tragedy, his family found a small comfort. He died doing what he loved. He had faced the mountain, stood at the top of the world, and etched his name into history. Now, his spirit remains forever woven into Everest's icy winds, whispering through the peaks, a reminder that no matter how strong, how determined, Everest always has the final say. Natalia Nemitz never saw it coming. It was just another day at the Slavyanka confectionery factory in Stary Oskol, Russia. October 20th, 2017. A day like any other, until it wasn't. Natalia was 36 years old, a hardworking factory worker and a devoted mother to her 10-year-old son, Ivan. She lived in the Belgorod Oblast region, working long hours to provide for her child. Like many others, she relied on the factory for her livelihood, never questioning the risks that came with the job. The Slavyanka confectionery factory was a major employer in the area, producing sweets and other confectionery products. Inside, massive industrial machines stirred and melted ingredients at dangerously high temperatures. These machines were essential to production, but they were also deadly if proper safety measures weren't followed. That morning, Natalia was assigned to clean one of the large caramel mixers. It was routine work, something she had likely done many times before, but something went terribly wrong. No one saw exactly how it happened. Maybe she slipped on the factory's slick floors. Maybe the stifling heat and fumes in the air made her dizzy. Maybe she lost her balance for just a second. All that mattered was this. She fell into the boiling caramel. And then, the mixer started. Thick, molten caramel engulfed her body almost instantly. The temperature was far beyond the boiling point of water. The pain would have been unimaginable. But Natalia never even had the chance to scream. The intense heat likely knocked her unconscious almost immediately. The machine's sharp industrial blades, designed to stir and smooth the caramel, began turning. By the time her coworkers realized she was missing, it was too late. They searched the factory floor, calling her name, but their search ended in horror when they spotted something sticking out of the caramel-filled vat: her legs. The rest of her had already been consumed by the boiling mixture. Panic spread through the factory, but there was nothing anyone could do. Natalia Nemitz, a mother, a worker, and a fighter, was gone in the most unimaginable way possible. And yet, the nightmare didn't end there. The factory's management tried to cover it up. They warned the workers to stay silent. Anyone who spoke would be fired. There were no official reports, no public acknowledgement. They wanted the accident erased as if it had never happened. But the truth has a way of forcing itself into the light. A local newspaper, Komsomolskaya Pravda, uncovered the horrifying details. Investigators soon arrived and found serious safety violations at the factory. Workers had not been given proper training. Safety protocols had been ignored. Even worse, this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the third worker death at the factory in just 1 year. Natalia's death wasn't just an accident. It was preventable. She had walked into work that morning expecting to go home to her son at the end of her shift. But because of negligence, she never got that chance. Her son, Ivan, was left without a mother. He was taken in by his aunt, forced to start over in a world that had just stolen the most important person in his life. There was no justice for Natalia. No undoing what had happened, just a lesson. A brutal, gut-wrenching lesson about the cost of cutting corners, about the lives shattered by negligence, about a mother who walked into work one morning and never walked out. The African wilderness is a place of breathtaking beauty, a land where nature reigns supreme, and every moment holds the promise of wonder or danger. For Gail Matson, an 80-year-old adventurer from Minnesota, this was meant to be her last great journey, a final grand adventure before slowing down. She had dreamed of this, watching the golden sunrise spill across the vast landscapes of Zambia's Kafue National Park, listening to the calls of birds unseen, feeling the raw pulse of the wild. But the wilderness does not grant guarantees, and on one fateful day in December 2018, the dream turned into a nightmare. The morning began, as so many others had before, a game drive into the heart of Africa's oldest and largest national park, covering more than 8,700 square miles of untamed land. The safari vehicle rumbled over the dirt paths, carrying Matson and 5 other guests, along with their seasoned guide. Cameras in hand, they marveled at the world around them, at the quiet majesty of the land, unaware of the unseen presence lurking nearby. Then, without warning, it happened. From the thick brush, an elephant emerged. Not just any elephant, a bull, massive, powerful, unpredictable. Its movements were fast. Too fast, it was charging. The guide, trained for such encounters, reacted instantly, but there was no time, no space to escape. The terrain was rough, the path blocked. There was nowhere to run. A voice, desperate, called out, "Hey! Hey! Hey!" A futile attempt to halt the inevitable. The bull had us struck. With terrifying force, the elephant barreled into the side of the safari truck, flipping it as if it weighed nothing. Metal crumpled. Bodies were thrown. Chaos erupted in an instant. When the dust settled, the unthinkable became reality. Matson lay lifeless. One moment she had been holding a flower, smiling for a photograph, savoring the adventure she had long awaited. The next, she was gone. 4 others sustained injuries, cuts, bruises, the deep shock of surviving what should have been impossible. One woman was so badly hurt she had to be airlifted to South Africa for emergency care. The rest, shaken but alive, would carry the horror of that day forever. The news of her death rippled through those who knew her. Friends back in Arizona, where she also had a home, struggled to process the loss. She was living life, they said. She told us this would be her last big adventure, and yet no one could have imagined how it would end. The tragedy left many questioning what had provoked the bull's attack. No one knew for certain. Climate change had been disrupting migration patterns, forcing animals into unexpected areas, creating unforeseen conflicts between wildlife and humans. But there was no easy explanation. The wild does not follow human logic. It does not offer reasons, nor does it pause for grief. It simply exists, raw, powerful, and indifferent. The safari company, Wilderness, reeled from the loss. "Our guides are extremely well trained," said CEO Keith Vincent. "But in this instance, the terrain and vegetation were against us. There was no way to move the vehicle out of harm's way fast enough." Authorities launched an investigation, but there was little to uncover. The truth was already known. The wilderness is unpredictable. Even the most experienced travelers, the most careful guides, the best laid plans, none of it matters when nature decides otherwise. For Gail Matson, her last great adventure did not end in peaceful reflection, nor in quiet reminiscence of a life well lived. It ended in the raw, unfiltered reality of the wild, a reminder that while we may journey into nature-seeking beauty, it remains untamed. It does not yield, it does not forgive. The crisp, merciless air sliced through Peter Schwartz's senses as he jolted awake on May 24, 2023. But this wasn't Vancouver. This wasn't the warmth of his home. This was Camp 4, perched at a staggering 26,247 feet on the icy slopes of Mount Everest. Peter was in the heart of the death zone, where the air is too thin to sustain life. His breaths were short, ragged. A headache pounded against his skull. A wave of nausea twisted in his stomach. Something was wrong. At 63 years old, Peter wasn't just any climber. A respected anesthesiologist at UBC and Vancouver General Hospital, He had spent his life navigating the fine line between life and death. But here, on Everest, the odds were different. This was his dream, a lifelong pursuit fueled by a relentless spirit. He had trained, he had prepared, he had made it this far, and now the summit was within reach. But Everest doesn't care about dreams. The mountain whispers warnings in the wind, subtle at first, a pounding skull, a tightening chest, a creeping dizziness. These are the first signs, the mountain's way of testing your resolve, luring you forward even as it tightens its grip. Peter had a choice. He could push on, chase his dream, or listen to the warning signs clawing at his body. With the howling winds as his only witness, he made the call. He would descend. It was the right decision, but it would not save him. The journey down was just as treacherous as the climb up. Every step became heavier. The mountain fought back. The winds lashed against his body. The icy slopes turned treacherous beneath his feet. He aimed for Camp 2, where a helicopter waited to take him to safety. But first, he had to reach Camp 3. As he staggered downward, his body began to betray him. His legs weakened. His breaths grew erratic. The nausea worsened. Every step was a battle. His once steady pace became unsteady, sluggish. His vision blurred. The mountain was pulling him under. Still, he pushed forward. Camp 3 was close. So close. But Everest had already made its decision. Darkness crept in. His vision dimmed. His body refused to go any further. And then, nothing. The brutal cold wrapped around him like a final embrace. His weary eyes locked on the short distance to Camp 3, but his body would never make it. The altitude sickness had won. Everest had claimed another. Peter Schwartz collapsed, his breath stolen by the mountain. His heart, weakened by the relentless altitude, gave out in the silent, frozen abyss. His body remained on the eroded slopes, yet another fallen climber in Everest's vast, icy graveyard. Back home, his loved ones grieved, but not with regret. He had lived fully, fearlessly, relentlessly. He had faced Everest head-on, knowing the risk, knowing the cost. His journey ended in the mountain's grasp, but his legacy remained unbroken, a testament to the unstoppable human spirit that dares to reach for the impossible. Because on Everest, not all victories mean survival. It was early September 2019, and Samuela Kira Wakayawa was chasing a new beginning. A former schoolteacher from Fiji, he had left behind a complicated past to start over in Australia. He was 40 years old, eager to build a better life, and determined to make the most of his fresh start. He had buried his father earlier that year. His marriage had fallen apart, but despite it all, he remained hopeful. He had found work with A1 Arbor Tree Services, a tree management company in Sydney. He shared photos of himself in front of the Sydney Opera House and the Harbour Bridge, proof that he was embracing his new home. His friends and family back in Fiji saw a man smiling through the struggles, a man refusing to let life break him. But fate had other plans. The morning of September 7th, 2019 started like any other. It was a Saturday. Samuela was on a job at Cromer School in Linfield, Sydney, alongside two co-workers. His task was to feed branches into a wood chipper, a machine with a simple purpose but an unforgiving nature. He should not have been doing it by hand. The wood chipper's design specifications clearly stated that a mechanical log loader should be used. The machine itself bore a glaring warning: danger. Do not hand-feed this machine. Severe injury or death can result. But those warnings were ignored. At some point, his co-workers stepped away to move a car. Samuela was left alone. He continued feeding the branches, unaware that every second brought him closer to disaster. Then, the unimaginable happened. In an instant, Samuela was pulled in. The monstrous machine did not hesitate, did not stop. His body disappeared into the in-feed hopper, dragged towards the roaring internal disc drum. There was no time to scream, no time to react. By the time his co-workers returned, it was already too late. Samuela was gone. Blood was splattered across the machine, a gruesome and undeniable sign of what had taken place. A sickening realization set in. They called the authorities, their hands shaking as they dialed, their voices barely able to form the words. Safe work. New South Wales launched an immediate investigation. What they found was infuriating. A one-arbor tree. Services had ignored safety protocols. The wood chipper was not meant to be fed by hand. It had clear warnings against it. The company had failed to conduct a proper risk assessment, failed to ensure its equipment was being used safely, failed to provide adequate training. Worse still, the machine was already faulty before that morning, and yet they let him use it. The court found the company's negligence undeniable. The harm was entirely foreseeable, and the steps to prevent it had been simple, and yet they did nothing. At first, A1 Arbor Tree Services was fined $3 million. A guilty plea reduced the fine to $2.25 million, but no amount of money could bring back Samuela. Sophie Kotsis, New South Wales's Work, Health and Safety Minister, called it what it was, an avoidable tragedy. She reminded employers that workers should not have to fear for their lives just to earn a living, that safety laws exist for a reason, that one moment of carelessness, one ignored warning, can be the difference between life and death. Samuela's friends and family were left to mourn a man who had endured so much, only to have his life stolen from him in the cruelest way. He had been humble, hard-working, and always ready to make others laugh, and now he was gone. A man who had traveled thousands of miles for a second chance at life had instead met his death in a machine that never should have been running the way it was, all because someone chose to cut corners. Dr. Thomas McAfee had spent his life dedicated to medicine, to leadership, to the pursuit of knowledge. But on a September day in 2013, none of that mattered. The towering force of nature that is an elephant, one of the world's most powerful creatures, brought his story to a sudden and brutal end. It was meant to be a final escape before a new beginning. At 58, McAfee had achieved remarkable success, serving as a respected dean at UC San Diego and preparing to step into a prestigious new role as chief executive of the Keck Medicine of USC Medical Foundation. Before taking on the next chapter of his career, he had chosen to indulge in one of life's great luxuries, a safari in Tanzania's vast, untamed Tarangire National Park. The golden plains, the towering baobab trees, the endless sky. It was the kind of trip that promised adventure, beauty, and serenity, but it would end in horror. On that fateful day, McAfee and two companions ventured out on foot, eager to see Africa's majestic wildlife up close. It was a rare and intimate experience, one that many dream of but few dare to do. But deep in the wilderness, where the rules of man no longer apply, nature can turn ruthless in an instant. A herd of elephants, massive, unpredictable, and fiercely protective, emerged before them. Perhaps they were too close. Perhaps the elephants felt threatened. What happened next was pure terror. Sensing danger, the trio turned and ran, but McAfee lost his footing. The ground beneath him betrayed him, and in that single, devastating second, his fate was sealed. One of the massive creatures charged, its thunderous steps shaking the earth. There was no escape. The elephant trampled him, its sheer weight crushing the life from his body. Though help arrived, there was nothing anyone could do. He was gone. His sister, Skylie McAfee, spoke through the grief, knowing her brother had understood the risks. He was doing what he wanted to do, she said. He had been to Africa before. He had marveled at its beauty. He had respected its dangers. But respect is no shield when faced with the raw, untamed force of the wild. His death sent shockwaves through the community he had left behind. Colleagues at UC San Diego were in disbelief. The loss of such a brilliant mind, such a respected leader, was almost impossible to process. "It's a true tragedy and great loss to all of us," wrote Munir Soliman, Assistant Vice Chancellor of Health Sciences International. Plans for memorial events were already being made, but nothing could fill the void left behind. McAfee's body was taken to Arusha Lutheran Medical Center as arrangements were made to return him home. Meanwhile, questions lingered. Had they been part of a guided tour? Had there been armed rangers present? Or had they ventured too far, unaware of the danger lurking just beyond their peaceful retreat? In the vastness of Tarangire National Park, where the land belongs not to man but to the creatures that roam it, there are no second chances. Elephants, despite their gentle reputation, can be deadly when they feel threatened. Weighing up to 15,000 pounds, a charging elephant is an unstoppable force. They are not cruel nor vengeful. They simply follow the laws of the wild, and for those who cross into their domain, even the smallest misstep can be fatal. For Kafue, the dream of an African safari became a nightmare. In the end, nature did not care about his titles, his achievements, or his plans for the future. It only saw an intruder, and it did what nature does. The wild does not forgive. It does not show mercy. And in the vast, beautiful, and unforgiving landscapes of Africa, even the most seasoned traveler can find themselves at the mercy of forces far greater than themselves. The frigid winds howled like ghosts through the jagged peaks of Mount Everest. Gimi Tenji Sherpa stood on the icy slopes of the Khumbu icefall, the weight of his pack pressing heavily against him, but his face, weathered, strong, unreadable, betrayed no sign of strain. He had done this before. At 38 years old, Gimi was no ordinary climber. A veteran Sherpa, he had conquered Everest multiple times, guiding others to the summit, ensuring their survival while risking his own life with every ascent. The Himalayas were his home, their dangers as familiar to him as breathing. But Everest does not care how many times you've bested it. It was April 14th, 2022. Another expedition, another climb. His mission was routine: carry supplies to Camp 2. Alongside a dozen other Sherpas from international mountain guides, he moved through the deadly Khumbu icefall with practiced precision. The football field, a relatively stable section of the icefall at 17,999 feet, lay ahead. Compared to the chaotic maze of shifting seracs and deep crevasses elsewhere, this stretch was a momentary reprieve. But Everest does not give reprieves. Somewhere along the ascent, it happened. A sudden wave of nausea crashed over him. His chest tightened. His breath, once steady, controlled, turned shallow and ragged. Panic crept in. Something was wrong. He pressed forward, willing his body to obey. He had done this 100 times. But his vision blurred. His legs wobbled beneath him. The weight of his pack felt unbearable. Though he had carried heavier loads before, his body was failing him. Desperate, Nima stopped. He turned, searching for his fellow climbers, but saw no one. He was alone. The nausea grew worse. His breathing became erratic. The mountain spun around him. He tried to push on, but his body rebelled. His only option now was to wait. He sank to the ice, still strapped into his pack, hoping a few moments of rest would restore his strength. They didn't. The cold crept in. His vision dimmed, his fingers numbed. The howling wind drowned out everything but the faint, distant beat of his failing heart. Then silence. When they found him at 4 a.m., he was still sitting upright, his backpack secured tightly to his body. His face was peaceful, as if he had simply closed his eyes and drifted away. But Everest had claimed another. No signs of a fall, no avalanches, no trauma, only the silent killer, high-altitude sickness. It was cruel irony. A Sherpa, a guardian of the mountain, taken by the very force he had spent his life mastering. A third of all deaths on Everest belonged to Nepali guides and porters, the unsung heroes who carry the weight of others' dreams, often at the cost of their own lives. And Nigma Teni Sherpa was now among them. His story was not just another statistic. It was a warning, a reminder that Everest, for all its allure, is not a prize to be won. It is a force to be survived. October 23, 2023, just another workday in downtown Boston. The city was alive with its usual rush, people heading to work, taxis weaving through traffic, and businesses opening their doors. High above the busy streets, Nicholas J. Marks, a 40-year-old window cleaner, prepared for another day on the job. He had been doing this for over 20 years, scaling some of the tallest buildings in the city. His job was dangerous, but Nicholas was an expert. He was careful, methodical, and respected by his colleagues. He knew the risks better than anyone. But on that day, something went terribly wrong. Nicholas was working on the 32-story office building at 100 Summer Street. As he prepared to lower himself into his bosun's chair, the safety anchor line, his lifeline, suddenly snapped. In an instant, the thing that was supposed to keep him secure failed. Nicholas fell. He plummeted toward the street below, hitting a parapet wall with such force that it left visible damage. Witnesses on the ground could do nothing but watch in shock. Some screamed. Others called 911, their hands shaking as they struggled to process what had just happened. Police and emergency responders arrived quickly. Officers roped off the area with yellow tape, while detectives took photographs of the scene. A single shoe, a shattered piece of plastic, and the broken bosun's chair were all that remained of Nicholas's final moments. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was something that never should have happened. An investigation by OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, revealed chilling details. Nicholas's employer, Sky Safety Incorporated, had failed him. The company had not properly inspected the safety equipment. It had allowed workers to use lifelines that were already worn and defective. It had not trained them to spot these dangers before they stepped over the edge. OSHA fined the company
$447,000.
SOC, swing citing repeated and willful violations of safety regulations. Inspectors concluded that Nicholas's death could have been prevented if the company had followed proper safety procedures, but Sky Safety denied responsibility. They insisted that they had spent money on new safety equipment and that Nicholas had been properly trained. They claimed that an unseen piece of metal had severed the rope, an unexpected hazard they had no way of preventing. But OSHA found no evidence to support that claim. Nicholas's death left behind a grieving family, including 2 young children who would never see their father again. His co-workers, many of whom had looked up to him for guidance, were left questioning their own safety. This wasn't just a freak accident. It was a warning, a reminder that when companies cut corners on safety, people die, and no worker should ever have to wonder if today will be their last. On a quiet evening in May 2018, deep within Safari Lodge of Uganda's Queen Elizabeth National Park, a horrific tragedy unfolded, one so sudden, so brutal, that it left an entire community in shock. At the Mwea Safari Lodge, a 2-year-old boy, full of innocence and curiosity, wandered just a few steps too far. He had been following his nanny, unnoticed, when the darkness of the wild came for him. It happened in an instant. A leopard, lurking in the shadows, saw its moment and struck. Before the nanny even realized what was happening, the beast had clamped its powerful jaws around the tiny child and vanished into the night. A scream shattered the air. The nanny turned, eyes wide with terror, just in time to see the leopard dragging the helpless toddler into the thick brush. She ran after them, desperation fueling her chase, but it was useless. Within moments, the child was gone. A frantic search began, but the jungle was silent, swallowing its victim whole. Hours passed. When dawn broke, the grim reality set in. Beneath a tree, rangers discovered the child's remains, his tiny skull, a few scattered bones. The leopard had not only killed him, it had fed on him. The cruelty of nature had never felt so raw, so merciless. The boy's mother, a game ranger at the park, had been at work when her son was taken. His father, Francis Manana Nabugier, spoke of his unbearable grief. "Uwe gave us the coffin," he said, voice hollow with pain. "My son is gone. Nothing will bring him back." But grief was not enough. He wanted answers. He wanted justice. How could this happen in a place where people were meant to be protected? The Uganda Wildlife Authority scrambled to respond. Bashir Hangi, their spokesman, admitted that the leopard had now tasted human blood, a chilling fact that meant it might strike again. "We are working towards tracking it down," he said. "It is not good to keep it there." The attack sent shockwaves through Uganda, a country where leopard encounters with humans were rare. But this was not just a tragic accident. It was a nightmare that no parent should ever have to endure. The loss of a child in such a gruesome way, taken by a predator from the very place meant to be a home, was almost too much to bear. As the search for the leopard continued, one thing became clear. In the wild, there are no second chances. A single misstep, a moment of distraction, and the jungle takes what it wants.